BRICS Summit in Xiamen. Now, do you think with the 70 days and of coming to an end in Doklam, the presence of your Prime Minister Modi will at least be symbolically a success of this very important international event to be hosted by China?
Well, I'd like to say that as important as the standoff was the peaceful way it was resolved. And I'd like to point out that, I mean, even during this period of what we called very high tension, there was never any shot fired between the Indian and the Chinese forces. In fact, not at all. So I would like to say that Doklam is an example of tension, yes, but also of a way of ensuring that this tension did not get into the situation of any kind of conflict. And the reality of the situation is both India and China know that these two ancient civilizations should not enter into a conflict with each other. So I would like to say that yes, it's a very happy event that the Doklam issue has been settled, and I'm very confident that my Prime Minister will come to Xiamen with a lot of very constructive proposals as to how BRICS can be strengthened.
But security is a major problem in India because we are the one country that have been constantly being hit by terrorist strikes. We have had massive disaster-like situations with terrorist strike, which we think are terrorists based in Pakistan. And we are expecting China to do something about it. But China is changing the whole argument around, talking about comprehensive global situation when even the United States is now with India saying that Pakistan is harboring terrorists and China is the best friend of Pakistan, can do something about it. But we are not getting that support.
China is also condemning terrorism. China, and the fact that China is a friend of Pakistan does not mean that China harbor terror or China condone terrorism, as some people imagine. I think you have to make these things different.
You are absolutely right. I am fully with you in that. The question is the Pakistan government really friendly to its own people? Because its own people are getting killed for 20 years, and almost every day people are getting killed. Let us have a world that is less dependent on the West. Mm-hmm. That is what China has been asking. Mm-hmm. But then if you want to create that, China should be ready to share. China should not be lead by, the last three institutions that have been created. Shanghai Economic Cooperation Organization, yes. SCO, AIB, and the BRICS Bank or the NDB. All the three have been located in China, as if there are no other 5 countries. So China should be ready to share. One of the criticism against China is that it is not open to sharing with other developing countries. But you see, the situation with Russia is different. Russia is heavily dependent on a 30-year gas and oil purchase agreement that China has. Russia is in a financial very bad situation, particularly after the oil prices have fallen. So there is no way Russia could take a counterpoint with China at this stage.
Why would you talk about a counterpoint? I mean, when we're talking about cooperation, I don't think that is the right approach. Maybe that is also the way how many Indian people are seeing this, that when they're dealing with China, it's more dealing with an adversary instead of a potential cooperator. Is there a sentiment there?
That's not the question. I have already explained that 3 institutions have been created. All 3 are based in China. So if China is ready to share, there is no question of a counterpoint.
Well, I think, as I said, China is willing to share. So ladies and gentlemen, let's give it up for my 4 co-hosts.
Because BRICS has been around for a while, but it has to start leading now with alternative parallel structures on the international stage. I call it a world without the West, because the West is not leading. It's time for us to lead.
So you'll be focusing on
media.
Okay, what kind of role BRICS can play in that regard? Vishnu, from your perspective?
Well, thank you very much. I think BRICS is an incredible opportunity for all of these nations to truly work together in the partnership that BRICS is always supposed to symbolize. But let's face the facts. Coming into this BRICS summit, India and China have had some very serious differences, and mature diplomacy has been able to resolve, at least for the moment, the standoff that we've seen. India and China need to work together. Will this be symbolized? Will this actually fructify into something substantial at BRICS? That's what I'll be looking at.
We still have Western narratives that dictate what we talk about. It's about media. And we have, since the 2008 financial meltdown, we have a lot of media that's very concentrated. It isn't concentrated in the countries that we come from. It remains in the West. And I look at all of our logos here, and I'll go to our Indian colleague first. I mean, we are necessary. Why are we necessary? I would say we have to break the monopoly of Western narratives about our parts of the world, because they still dictate the pace.
That's right. I absolutely agree with you. I really believe that BRICS is an organization which can, in effect, threaten or potentially even replace G7. If you look at the creation of the BRICS Bank, that's certainly something which lends a lot of power, potentially, to all the BRICS nations.
When I hear the phrase in Western media, the international community says, the international community thinks, the international community promotes, what are they talking about? Because they're not talking about us most of the time. This is the kind of discursive change that we need, because the international community is the United States and its allies. NATO, throw in Japan, throw in Australia, a few other countries,
Yeah.
some in the Middle East, okay? That's their international community. We need to break out of that. We need to take this language to ourselves.
Charles, you want to say something?
Well, actually, I was thinking that it would be very helpful if the BRICS countries, the media of the BRICS countries, do something for each other as well. In terms of describing, I would love to see your program cover more about Russia, for example.
The point. Okay,
Or-
we'll do that.
Exactly, or India to cover in a
No, I think that's
positive way
a
about
really
China.
important point. And in fact, prior to this program beginning, we've been discussing amongst ourselves the importance of media within the BRICS community. And this is a process, a program like this, which we want to actually repeat next year as well. Because BRICS nations need to stop thinking about themselves and need to start thinking about each other as well.
Media ownership is very, very important, and it's very, I think, scary right now. Look who owns Google. Look who owns YouTube. Look who owns Facebook. Who owns Twitter? Okay? These are more or less universal institutions, and it's a very tight, controlled ownership there. We need, as BRICS countries, to come together to come up with alternatives to those institutions.
So now, time is on India's side. The floor is yours, Vishnu.
Well, Yushin, thank you very much. India comes into this year's BRICS summit after having gone through a very difficult experience along with our friends and our partners from China. But I think it's important to reflect on the maturity shown by both countries in resolving the Doklam standoff, the border standoff, where we've had armed guards of either side just a few hundred meters away from each other. The issue itself, as far as the boundary between India and China is concerned, has not been resolved. It was not expected to have been resolved by the time BRICS started. But what has happened, and I think this is a very positive development, is there is a proselytization to a particular crisis in a particular area. And we've got lots of concerns in this particular regard. It is so important to have had that element of de-escalation take place because, let's face it, China and India are not what BRICS is only about. BRICS is about our partner nations, and yes, India and China are very important partners and players within the BRICS process, but concerns, and there are many between India and China, should not necessarily dominate the BRICS proceedings because that BRICS needs to do. But I actually wanted to ask a question to some of our Chinese guests today. In fact, I wanted to go across to Mr. Yang Xiu of the China Institute of International Studies and ask you, sir, the first question. Shrill rhetoric in the media, whether it's from China or it's from India. We have won, we have achieved a great victory, we have taught the other side a message. At a time like this, when there has been successful diplomacy, is there a danger of shrill rhetoric from either side played out in the media?
It's a very good question. Let me put it this way. In English, there's a saying, there should be the dog swag the tail rather than the tail swag the dog. And we do have a lot of differences and sensitive differences between China and India. But in general, we do have a larger common ground and a common interest, including the cooperation, the common interest in strengthening the BRICS. So compared with the whole dog and the tails, we need to be more smart and more rational. That is the common principle for both of the capitals and both of the great peoples.
Thank you so much. And I mean, I really respect that perspective because there is so much more than the differences we have. No one is in denial of the differences, but the fact of the matter is we need to focus on so much more. I also wanted to flip the question somewhat, go across to Madhav Nalapat. He's a UNESCO Peace Chair at Manipal University in India, and be somewhat more cynical perhaps and ask the question, can we realistically have BRICS working without India and China talking in the way that they need to be talking?
Well, Vishnu, I'd like to say that we saw from our Chinese friends that the tone would be different. Now, I just want to point out the old Latin point about the tertius gardens, the third party. The fact is that if India and China collide with each other, neither country will gain, some third parties will gain. So you have that kind of situation between India and China. Now, I was quite confident, frankly, that the leaders of the two countries, Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping, will ultimately resolve this for the simple reason, the higher you go in your analysis, that is, the more into the future you go, the broader you go in analysis, comprehensively you grow in the relationship between India and China, not just Doklam, not just a 4,000-kilometer boundary, but a whole complex of issues in which India and China are working together and can work together. It's obvious that the two countries need to be good friends. So my expectation is that kind of a friendship will be further reinforced in BRICS. I was a little dismayed, to see the extreme overreaction to what, in my view as a scholar, was a very minor incident.
But I think there's a reason why the Chinese is overreacting, because over the past couple of years, there have been a series of example or indications of the kind of hostility we perceive that the Indian governments and the Indian media has been adopting vis-a-vis China, with China as a potential target. I don't know whether my experts would agree with me. Charles?
I make investments in India as well as in China. Now, in the Chinese case, I have to say, the media is pretty unified in terms of wanting to play down the event. So those of us who are in business don't see any possibility of a war because it really helps some third party. But the media side from India actually had some very harsh statements.
I take your point, sir, but I think that's a very, very contentious point, because the way we see it in India, as we read the Global Times or we read several other Chinese publications, including publications online accounts as well, is that China really wanted to up the ante in this particular case. The use of the term war was used in commentaries and editorials in the Chinese media.
There's only one Global Times in China.
India did not want a war, does not want a war. We want peace.
Yeah, we
but
want
China
peace as well.
should not feel India to be a threat. And I think it's questions like this, no disrespect to you, my friend, that add to the negative vibes which we don't need going into BRICS.
China doesn't see India as a threat.
We don't see you as a threat. We don't see you as a threat.
But
we would like you to be a
Vishnu,
friend.
you have written articles where the headline says, I am China, India and the United States and Japan
Yes.
participate in the largest maritime drills.
But there's a reason for
Bring it
that.
back to BRICS. Let's bring it back to BRICS.
There's a reason for that. But then again, answering that question would turn this BRICS fora into China and India, which is
Let's
precisely
stick to
what I
BRICS.
initially
Let's bring it
pointed.
back. You're running
This
out of
has
time,
to be
Vishnu.
about BRICS.
You're running out of time.
I think BRICS
Yes.
should also look at ensuring that there's always a harmonious environment among member countries. It is for that reason, when there are political issues or standoff, the leaders must quickly act. BRICS can't be only about trade and investment, but also political way of solving issues.
I think, again, we know that the reason, and this is as the Russian side advocated, was that the media plays an important role. What happened in the run-up of the summit was that there were belligerent remarks from both sides of the media, which made it difficult for diplomats to actually resolve this issue. There's a mechanism called the mechanism of special representatives which exists between India and China, but had there been a coordinated or cordial responses or less belligerent responses from media, it wouldn't have happened.
Something
What we
can be
need to
done.
work on is build that mechanism of SRs and ensure that such incidents don't happen. They've happened in the past. We've gotten out of them. They take 8 or 9 years. But this mechanism is extremely...
Let's hope this mechanism will work better. Vishnu, unfortunately, time is up, but thank you very much and congratulations.
There's a question here as
We
well.
have a question from India as well.
Yeah.
I totally agree with what you're saying. We keep on comparing our government. I don't see any reason why. Between the 5 countries, we have more people and more money than most countries combined in the whole world. We don't need to be dependent on anybody. If we can somehow work on better tourism policies, more easy visa-free access between our countries, we can get so much more between trade, tourism, and just generally friendship, happiness, all that.
I see China wants to go at it again.
Anybody thought about that? Our Indian friends, please.
To be created was the 2008 financial crisis. What has happened over the years, and which shows the potential that BRICS has, is that we've coordinated our responses on and World Bank. When we talk of economic issues, we need to understand that BRICS is a bloc. It is not a global system right now, but within ourselves, we've coordinated in those financial systems that already exist. Now, as we try to create those systems, including a new credit rating agency, we try to establish a new development bank, which I think last month announced that they would be funding projects for about $3 billion. We need to understand how we create a new global financial structure. Again, we talked about, you mentioned United States having 15%. Together, when BRICS combined together, they were able to get a reform package at World Bank that increased our shares by 6%.
Yeah.
So while BRICS in itself, at the moment, cannot create a new financial order, it can use the strength that it has to influence it and make it dent.
Oh, they want to stay together. But what is the Indian perspective? I see a lot of hands on the Indian side. Okay, this gentleman first.
Yeah, I can talk about one thing, that's unity in diversity. There are differences among some of the BRICS countries like India, China, but I think there has to be more communication, more cultural exchange, art, sports, because India, China, they are like ancient civilizations. Similarly, when it comes to sports, South Africa, India, like we have a strong sporting partnership. We can learn from China, Russia, because they are the host countries of Olympics, so is Brazil, so Football World Cup. So I think more and more people know about each of these countries, common people, businessmen, traders. I think that's more important to build a stronger BRICS. So I believe that we should encourage, all the BRICS countries should encourage more like cultural exchange, art and trade exchange programs.
That's a great point you're making. I think that is one of the most important things we should do, is for our country to have more cultural human contacts. Looking back what have you gotten out of this conversation? What will you will take home and maybe think a little bit about? Peter?
For me, it's kind of gone full circle from what we heard about cultural exchanges and things
Yeah.
like that. We need a medium to do that. We can't rely upon Google and Reuters to do that for us. They are a filter, and they are demonizing us. That filter does demonize us.
Yeah, Vishnu?
I think BRICS is successful. I think that success resides in the fact that there is incredible talent, there is incredible economic opportunity, and there's also incredible economic success. I think the ability of all of us to be able to sit together and talk together, work through our differences, augurs well for this particular group. And so for me, the essential message or the essential learning aspect is the fact that there are so many common interests that these countries have. It's about realizing this potential when our leaders sit together.
Brazil.
What I see in front of me now is diversity. So many views that I myself sometimes didn't know about, and I learned a lot here today. And I think our people, the people from Brazil, from China, South Africa, all of our people should have the opportunity to have this kind of information more often. As you said, Peter, we have filters that sometimes don't bring the information we should have, but the information they want us to have.
Exactly.
So I think this kind of debate here is very productive, and I congratulate cgtn for the initiative and for the hard work to make the show happen.
Is it for India?
Or for all the countries. So in Goa, in 2016, India proposed creation of a rating agency, international rating agency or a BRICS rating agency, because Standard & Poor, Moody's, these international rating agencies often do not understand or pretend not to understand the economics of developing countries. So a rating agency was proposed by India, and China was one country which was not interested, because China got very high marks from Standard & Poor and Moody's at that time. 1 year later, China is now very interested in the rating agency, because these international rating agencies have downgraded China. So now China feels that an injustice has been done to it. This is how developing countries or even highly developed country like China thinks. So this is one area when there may be some kind of a consensus, and the two countries may come together along with Russia, Brazil and South Africa in creation of a BRICS oriented rating agency.